So I had this idea for the children's sermon, and I decided I wasn't sure whether it was appropriate or not. So I'm going to use it on you. So I'm going to show you some photos, and we're going to play safe or scary. So photos of water, and you just kind of call out whether you think it's safe or scary. No right answer or wrong answer, but just let me know what you think. So photo number 1. Photo number 2. Safe. Photo number 3. Safe. Photo number 4. Scary. Yes, next. Yeah, next. Yeah. Except maybe to a surfer. A surfer might say, whoa! Yes. And the last, I think it's the last. Oh no, that one. Safe, yeah. And the next one. Especially with the lightning in the background. Do you think they were trying to cross that with the lightning going off too? What did their mothers tell them about that? So water, water is really kind of an amazing thing, that it can be both safe and scary, and we've had these events happening in our world over the last few weeks that have been traumatic as we've watched Texas and then Florida and parts of the Caribbean being battered by storms. We've watched the water flood in. We've watched the wind whipping the palm trees, and we've been hearing the stories on the news and trying to figure out exactly what's happening to the people who are in the line of these storms. And to have that happening at the same week where this story of Moses parting the Red Sea came up in the lectionary, it just was such an interesting juxtaposition about water and either its danger or its whatever else that it might be. Should we be singing hymns about the waters crashing, considering what's going on in the world at the moment? And even though there are certain things about water that are convenient, so for example, water does dry out, the waters do recede, it can leave a mess behind it. So my partner and I have been remodeling our bathroom, and the workers we're on the second floor of our building. And in the process of taking the toilet out to replace the floor, they broke a pipe. And the water started gushing out of the pipe. I wasn't there at the time. But it all started flooding down to the first floor, and right below our apartment is the dance studio in our building, with this beautiful 36 by 36 sprung wood floor. And of course, all the sheetrock kind of in between one another. No water damage at all in our bathroom, but we were scooping the water, pushing the water off the floor out the front door for a couple of hours because it had flooded for an hour or so before the city people could come and turn the water main off. And of course, as water does, it heads downward. There's some advantage to that. But in the process, it soaked the drywall. And of course, what happens when things get wet? Mold. The Bible doesn't talk a lot about mold, but this is actually a big problem with water. Things get wet, and then they get moldy. So you have to take everything out really quickly before that can happen. And the experts were telling me, you should be doing this within 36 hours. You should be doing this within... And so we pretty much did. And so I think we escaped that part of the problem. But it literally took 4 months before we were able to finally get all the pieces together to repair the dance studio. And actually, we still have just a little bit more. It took all that time, not just, because it's complicated. So these folks in the wake of the hurricane are going to be dealing not just with the effects of water and when water recedes, but also they're going to be dealing with insurance companies and construction people. And of course, everyone is going to be trying to repair and remodel at exactly the same time. This is complicated. So I have just a little bit, I can only kind of imagine a little bit what it must be like for folks. But I can't imagine how complicated the situation is and how dire it is. I find personally that, it's really kind of hard to tell exactly what's happening on the ground. One of the things I know about news reports is that we will see and hear the worst of it. So I don't know kind of how other people are dealing. I'm not really sure. Has the water receded in Beaumont, Texas? I don't even know. I do know, for example, that Chin's aunt lives in Tampa, and almost immediately we got reports that no, nothing had really happened in Tampa. Of course, we're hearing news reports of things that happened in Tampa, but she wasn't affected. There are people in Houston who weren't affected by flooding. So it's hard even to know kind of what people are dealing with at this particular time. But we know that it's a challenge, and we know it's a big challenge. And we know a lot of people are having to deal with that same situation at the same time. But I don't really want to talk today about floods and about the politics of restoration or any of those things. I want to talk about what it means to be underwater. That's a phrase we use. We're underwater. What does that mean from a physical point of view, or a spiritual point of view, or an emotional point of view? I would guess that on any particular Sunday, there are people sitting in these pews who are underwater in one way or another. And I would guess that almost everyone sitting in the pews here today has been underwater in one way or another. What does that mean on just a personal, spiritual level to be underwater? To be working with the challenge of feeling like you're swimming as fast as you can and it doesn't seem to be making any progress? What does it mean to be feeling like there's nothing to stand on, there's no firm ground to stand on? What does it mean to feel like things are just overwhelming? It's just too much. And in the middle of that, we have this amazing story of Moses and the Red Sea. Now, most of us, our picture about that story may very well be from this movie, The Ten Commandments. Am I right about that? Like when you think of the parting of the Red Sea, do you see Charlton Heston? And do you see these great walls of water? I swear to God, I had heard at one point that to create this visual effect, they used Jell-O. I don't think that's true, but that's what I heard. But I did find a little video, and I should have brought it for you, but it's an interesting little video of how they did actually create this visual effect by creating a big trough. They poured a whole lot of water into it. The water poured in, and then they just reversed that to create the parting. And then they had another place where the water was kind of going down a thing like this, and so the water's coming down and creating all these waves at the bottom. And they filmed that, and then they turned it on its side to create these walls of water, standing up on the side. It's amazing nonetheless, regardless of how they did it. But there's that question: will God part the waters? Will God part the waters? Now, because we're all progressive Christians, we get to decide for ourselves whether we think this is a miracle, and it's a miracle we believe in. You get to decide that. I'm not going to tell you this morning. You should believe, absolutely, that Moses parted the sea, they walked across there. I swear to God it would have been muddy, at least. But you get to decide whether it's important that there's that kind of supernatural element to Moses parting the Red Sea, to this escape the Israelites had from Egypt. Because we're progressive Christians, though, we also have to worry a little bit about the Egyptians, because they died. And if you were a modern-day Egyptian and you're reading that story, you would not be thinking, oh, my people, look what happened to my people. So because we are progressives, that piece comes up. God seems to be choosing sides. But if we just think about this from the point of view of this kind of amazing delivery, these people were delivered from bondage in Egypt. They were, in fact, the oppressors who were chasing them across the Red Sea. But it was a kind of symbol and sign of God's ability to create a way, even when the waters seem deep and scary. So what does it mean to be underwater? And what are we supposed to do? My alternative title for this sermon was Water Safety. And I sort of think we might look at this from the point of view of water safety. So if we are underwater, what are our options? Well, the very first one might be, well, maybe the water isn't as scary as we think. Like, I can imagine that many of us could name a kind of a water situation that at one point in their life was scary, but now isn't so scary. So like when you're a kid, the deep end of the swimming pool might seem really scary, but once you grow up and you get used to the deep end, not scary so much after that. Actually, I had kind of a reverse situation. I've always been very comfortable in the water and have swam in the ocean quite a bit. But the first time I went to Hawaii, I experienced the power of the waves in Hawaii and experienced that lack of control and realized that the power of those waves, it wasn't nearly as big as that big scary one we had in the picture. I realized how much more powerful those waves were and how scary that was. So at times the water may not be as scary as we think. Maybe we need to float. Maybe it's just as simple as finding that place of balance between who we are and the way that water works. So maybe it's finding the place of calm or peace inside. Maybe it's not resisting the things that we resist. Maybe it's turning to prayer or whatever to calm the fears that we might have so that we know that we can actually deal with the water that we're in. So perhaps it's as easy as floating. But sometimes that may not be enough. So maybe it's another option is the power of community. So I don't know how many of you heard this news story that happened just a few weeks ago where there was a family who was at the beach. A couple of them kids went out too far and they got caught in a riptide. And some of the other families went out to try to rescue them. They got caught too. And they were stuck out there. And what happened? A group of strangers formed a human chain from the beach out into the water to the people and pulled them back to safety. It was like 80 people. 80 people came together, made a human chain. I mean, like, who thought of that? And yet the community together had the power to overcome this scary water situation that those individuals, even sometimes, when a small community wasn't able to do it. So maybe what we need to do when we're feeling underwater is we need to join hands with the people around us or to look for the human chain that's ready to pull us back to safety. Maybe that's what we need. And finally, when we feel like we're underwater, perhaps what we need to do is believe that God could actually part the waters for us. That kind of amazing, miraculous part that's almost too hard to believe. But here's this story of God parting the water. And I may not be willing to tell you whether to believe that story or not. But I will say that if you ask me if I thought that God had the power to part the water when we felt we were underneath it? I would say yes. Amen.